Welcome back. Thank you very much for coming into our final session. This one's about sports betting sponsorships, and I am delighted to introduce a very esteemed panel today. We've got two operators on the panel. We've got from the Olybet and Olympic Entertainment Group, we've got Corey Plummer. From DraftKings, we've got Ryan Bahia. From the rights holder side, we've got the NBA with us, we've got Kuljit Singhdar with us, and from Sportradar, Hampus Lofquist. So I'd like you to just say a few words to introduce yourself, a little bit about what your role is now, and also maybe a little bit about your background and where you've come from.
All right. Hello, everyone. Corey Plummer, Chairman and CEO of Olympic Entertainment and Olybet Group. We operate in 10 countries across Europe with land-based digital and media. So I have roughly 150 casinos, 90 sports bars, and then a lot of media and digital online products through the Olybet brand, and that's our key brand. Across the space, we do a lot with sports rights and partners on broadcast, partnerships with our brand. I've been in Europe for 15 years, something like that. And have operated in other markets in Asia, in North America, South America. So I've been a lot of different places, but I've always viewed sports as a good medium to connect with a lot of different people, and I suspect that's why I'm on the panel.
Ryan from DraftKings, work on the business team, which is very North American focused, whether it be market access or our strategic partnerships. Been with the organisation for just over 3 years now as part of the SB Tech acquisition back in early 2020, and before that in the sports technology space in the data provider side of things.
Kuljit Singhdar. I've been at the NBA for 9 years now, responsible for our international gaming business. That essentially is how we commercialize any gaming vertical outside of the US, and also how we commercialize and distribute data, which is essentially our partnership with Sportradar, and I guess is one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today. Before that, I actually did used to work at Sportradar for a short period of time, before they were such a success. That was about 10 years ago now, but thankfully I've retained some friendships, so I can speak with you all today.
Good segue to me, I think. I'm Hampus Lofquist. Nice to see everyone here. I'm the Global Sponsorship Director at Sportradar. I have a background in sports marketing. I worked for UEFA for nearly a decade, quite a long time. Then I went agency side of the business, and then I joined Sportradar 4.5 years ago when we were starting all of this, starting the ads department. So my role then was to build up, the sponsorship side of things. What are we going to do in the sponsorship space? Since then, we've created a team, a division, and a line of business that's ultimately about creating partnerships between sports betting companies and rights holders, and also supporting the digital activation.
Great, thanks everybody. So to start off with, I think it'd be good just to talk a little bit about the evolution of sports betting. So, over the past decade or so, we all know there has been some amazing evolution within sports sponsorships. What have you seen in this, Corey? How have such sponsorships developed?
Well, certainly there's more access and engagement now than there were even 3 or 4 years ago, much less 10 years ago. We've moved certainly much farther away from just names on jerseys and maybe a few television commercials to much more access that people have, certainly in the mass market. A lot of streaming, a lot of extra shows. There's technology that's unrelated to our industry. If you talk to people at Formula One or the other sports that are trying to copy this formula in golf or tennis, that technology, streaming, apps, platforms, certainly has helped the sports industry, which helps obviously us in the industry if we're in sports betting. But it's a lot of it is about the access, people engaging with the sports through data, through a lot more opportunities to watch sport. We stream 4,000 events a month. 10 years ago, that was not happening. You didn't have these types of sports documentaries on that were in everyone's hands all the time. And the technology in the way that you view sports and can interact with the athletes on social media conversations before, there are many more people today interacting with sports differently than they did 10 years ago. Younger people engage with sports just as much as their parents and grandparents, just differently. Older people will watch an entire sporting event. Young people will watch 5 or 6 in that same period of time on multiple devices. So to me, these are the biggest changes: more technology, more visibility, more access, more data, more opportunity to engage on a different level with the athletes, with the sport, behind the scenes, these types of things, which drives interest. And eventually, if people want to make a sports wager, they can be more informed, and certainly more part of the sport.
Yeah, I think from an engagement perspective, it's certainly the same as what we see in terms of the US, but as a category itself, it's only 5 years old, so we haven't got that decade to draw back on. So it's a lot newer for us on our side of things, which brings, I guess, a lot more learning to see what's happened in Europe and other more mature markets, and a level of sophistication and appetite for learning comes with that. But I guess even on that 5 years, it's not like it's just, a switch has been flicked in 5 years and everybody's on. It was still turning things on state by state, and even this year, even though that's starting to slow down, we've seen a few this year. They've come at the right time in terms of sports, and then building up in terms of playoffs on that side with different, populations and different engagement in sports. Like Massachusetts is a good example, because of the way the sports teams were performing in that state and how they were doing, and at the time of year it launched. So still very early, but I think with that 5 years at the length of it, it's brought some real learnings in that shorter space of time, I think, because it's been a technology-first business in that regard.
And a lot of the US sports, as we know, they obviously, they lend themselves very well, don't they, to the sports sponsorship space as well. I mean, is that something that you've seen develop as well since that market opened up?
Yeah, especially with the sort of the major sports in that regard. They've got a good, I guess, menu or playbook, however you want to phrase it, in terms of how they work with sponsors and partners. And we've seen it previously with our daily fantasy background. We've worked with a lot of the major sports and teams to build those assets out and to work with them on that. So it's not come from zero. There's been a nice build-up, and those teams are pretty sophisticated, advanced, and leagues and competitions as well in terms of how they're working with their partners. So.
And Hampus, obviously you've worked in the sports betting space for several years now. I mean, what have you seen kind of since you started out to where we are now?
I think, what I've seen in these 4.5 years, like I used to work in sports marketing sponsorship, but not in betting, right? And the way we approached sponsorships at places like UEFA and working with other big rights holders was always partnerships, not sponsorships, right? So yes, there's always a financial exchange between the brand and the rights holder. You're going to pay for the IP and the rights. But if you can approach it as a partnership where, going into it, you are having a conversation, a plan, and a strategy for how the rights holder is going to, drive a return on that investment, that's when you have the foundations of a partnership. And I think in betting, that hasn't always been the case, right? I think there's perhaps, still a degree of education when it comes to, how do you properly activate a betting partnership. And that is starting to change and evolve. And I think, Corey will probably talk about some of the ways that they're doing it to date. I think the NBA have been pretty advanced in sort of understanding the need to do that and, create real value for their partners, digital obviously being a huge part of that, and I think we'll get into some of those examples today. Yeah.
And Kuljit, just bringing you in on that point as well, I mean, how are rights holders developing their understanding of the sports betting market? Is there anything that you're doing that furthers that understanding? But also, how do you create the most value for your sponsorship partners?
It's a good question, and we all noticed that you skipped me on that line of questions, by the way.
It's because you took the mickey out of my notes.
But I would just say that we don't actually treat this as a sponsorship category. That's not what it is for us. Right? When we were looking into, and this isn't just betting, but this is predictive gaming or fantasy gaming, there is a lot of studies out there that show that people who engage with their sports, with their leagues, in terms of predictive game or betting or fantasy gaming, they watch for longer, they watch more often, and they will watch games that they wouldn't normally watch. They'll watch teams that they're not fans of. So for us, it's an engagement play. This is an engagement category. And when you start off with that as a foundation, it's actually very easy to find value in this space. Because unlike other categories, if we have a partnership with a car manufacturer, the amount of cars sold is not directly related to a partnership with the league. In the betting space, what we try to do is form holistic partnerships. The basic premise is that if you are an NBA fan, you should want to bet with our partner DraftKings or our partner Olibet. because they are providing a better NBA experience, the authentic NBA experience. That should be, if that's what you're interested in, if you would like to bet, that's where you should be placing your bets. And therefore, that leads on to the fact that NBA handle and NBA market share for our partners should be increasing. And we find ways to be mutually incentivized. We are mutually incentivized with our partners to grow their market share because we want our fans to have the best NBA experience, and we think working with our partners, we can provide that. So that's I guess it's, your question was, how do we provide value for them? Well, we want that to happen, and they want it to happen, and there's a very easy way to measure that success.
Yeah, definitely this partnership point is absolutely key. I know that you all feel very strongly about that. And just picking up on the technology point as well that we talked about, I mean, what role has the technology actually played with regards to the evolution of this sports betting sponsorships? Yeah,
I'll jump in. And it sort of links back to what you were saying, Koji. We've got that partnership there. We've got it from a sort of consumer-first sponsorship, partnership element, a lot of assets, a lot of good messaging, great integrations, all that's brilliant, but I guess the next phase is when those fans come to our product, how does that engagement enhance, how do they stay with us? And that's through the menu of options or the product that they can enjoy, I guess, whether that's through extensive player props, same game parlay, markets being open for longer, visualizations, widgets, all those sorts of things to really create a great product rather than whether, if you advertise on a particular sport, but then the user comes in and it's only, limited betting options, outcome only, etc. That's not really going to do it to the same level. That's not going to engage them in the way that the partnership was set up to do. So it's really making sure that product element aligns with the sponsorship element and brings that together.
Okay, that's interesting. And Corey, which areas of the sponsorship business would you say that the tech has had the most impact on from your perspective?
In our business, it still comes back to the access to the product, which is the sport itself. Eventually, if people are interested in sport, it generally comes from seeing the sport.
Stone cold.
There's a different kind of sport going on in the kitchen.
That happens on every panel you speak at.
It does. You have to see the sport and to get people engaged, and I think the technology that creates opportunities to see sport in more places in more ways, especially for younger people, is the biggest thing for all sports, because lower tier sports, in Europe there's the big three, there's a lot of other sports, and until they get some visibility, some access from somewhere, we're streaming lots of sports that people have never heard of, but people are watching it. Thousands of people are watching, paddleball and women's sports in Ecuador and all this kind of stuff, Chinese table tennis. You have to have the visibility of a sport in order to get fan engagement and to get people to watch it and then eventually place a wager on it if that's the business you're in. For other media companies and for some rights holders, by strategy or by accident, they've figured this out through documentaries, behind-the-scenes access. Formula One is a really good example of creating behind-the-scenes content that wasn't available before. 300,000 to 400,000 people go to these events over the weekend. On television, all you see is the wheels and the cars going around. You have no idea what's going on there. It's a festival, but unless you're there, you have no idea. So it's very difficult to sell the sport. And until they tried to Americanize the sport, you were never going to see that. Golf is the same way. There's all kinds of stuff going on in golf tournaments over the course of the 4 days that's off the course, but on television they just show you people hitting the ball, not everything that goes on the field. It's also a festival sport. But this type of thing has led to a lot of fan engagement. Formula One has more fans today who had never watched racing before simply because of a show on Netflix. And others are trying to, capitalize on this type of thing. There are a lot more, I would say, content-related shows on about various sports. Sail GP is a really good one I like to watch. If you hadn't seen this before, you wouldn't know there was this sailing competition going on. So you have to have this access. You have to have the media. You have to have the production, because behind the production there has to be support from the athletes and also a story. And so the technology that goes with how you tell that story and how you give the access, I think, drives a lot of the interest and engagement. And then for all the people out in the room that are operators, if you're offering events and people can see the sport and try to understand it, then it helps the category grow, and that's a big part of it.
And in terms of the data points that are available as well, I mean, Hampus, I don't know if you want to come in on this, but you know, the data points that are available, I mean, certainly working with F1, they're one of our partners as well, and the amount of data points that you can supply, obviously that helps the betting operators, it helps the rights holders, because you can use that across various different channels. I mean, Hampus, I don't know if you want to pick up on that point.
I'll pivot that one to Kuljit, but no, just before that, I just wanted to say, like, listening to Kuljit and Corey, like, I think the broadcast side is really where technology, in this category in particular, right, you mentioned it, there is no other sponsorship category that has the potential in terms of, you know, enhancing viewership like sports betting does, right? Cars, beer, like, it's just different sponsorship categories. So if you're able to work with your partners, but also using technology to enhance that, whether it's through betting specific streaming overlays, whether it's creating additional content and making sure that gets served to the right people, all of that creates what you said. And, you know, you're more likely to watch if you bet on something, you're more likely to bet on something if you're watching it. And that's actually creating some interesting, I think, dynamics in the market, where we all know the sportsbook examples who have, you know, well, I guess broadcasters actually who have gone into sports betting, you know, like Sky and Fox in the US, DAZN being the latest one. But now I think you're also seeing, you know, you guys, the operators, wanting content, and not just behind the registration and the paywall, right? You want to be somewhere where fans go and consume sports. And, you know, Corey has an OTT platform where, you know, you're hosting content. Ryan, I think you have a content strategy, right? So for me, that's really, you know, an interesting kind of outcome of all of this, and technology sits at the core of that. I know I just completely sidetracked from your question.
No, it's fine. I mean, the broadcast point obviously is useful. Do you want to come in on that as well, Kuljit?
Yeah, I'll actually just come on the technology point. I mean, it may be surprising that the NBA has a view on the betting product itself. But when we look at the betting product for basketball, we think about things from the fan's perspective. And, you know, if you think traditionally, in-play betting markets for basketball really follow the football path, where you have periodic betting, what will happen in the next 10 minutes, what will happen in the next 5 minutes. Whereas, you know, we don't think basketball fans think like that. If you remember when, you know, the Warriors were winning so many championships, so often in games when they rested their starters for a period, they would fall behind and then mount a huge comeback in the second half of games. Like, that's an interesting proposition for a fan. Steph is back on the court. You know, how many, you know, he's just hit 2-3 points in a row. You know, he's on a streak. How hot do you think he'll get over the next few minutes? That's not the way the markets are presented. So we work with our partners to try and develop that in a language that attracts the fan. In a more authentic, engaging way. And the other thing, you know, that we are doing in partnership with Sportradar is working with some of the companies in the startup community. You know, we think micro betting in basketball has huge potential. So there are, you know, paths that we are taking to facilitate that, because, you know, we just think that the product could be enhanced, and we don't want basketball betting to just be a simple port of what's happening in football or tennis.
And definitely, obviously, your sport lends itself to the micro betting side of things as well, in terms of the amount of details and specific points and things that could happen in the match as well. So I think it would be great to understand from the panel as well what might be possible in this sports betting sponsorship space that's not currently happening. Is there anything that you would really like to see happening that you'd really like to push through if you could?
Shall I just jump in? You know, I love these visionary questions, because if we were visionaries, we probably wouldn't be sitting here telling you what the idea was. We'd be out there developing it, right? So it's kind of a difficult one. But for us, you know, the US is very different to the mature international markets. In the US, betting has been infused into broadcast in an engaging way, whereas in mature markets where regulation prohibits betting integration, all you're really seeing is advertising around the pitch, around the court, and we think that's a bit of a miss. You know, we have developed. You know, our goal as the NBA is to put the NBA in front of fans in whatever dimension they wish to express their fandom. if you're interested in merchandise, we have localized stores, we have online stores. If you're interested in content behind the scenes, we have a bunch of different local social media channels and localized content. Betting is no different. So we have alternate telecasts in the US that are produced with betting at the forefront. So we have talent talking about things in a betting, and not just who's going to win this game, but a rookie might be having a tremendous game. And how is that going to impact his chances of getting to the All-Star game? How is that going to impact his chances of winning Rookie of the Year? Things like that. And we think that's a bit of a miss internationally, where mature markets have they don't allow that, because betting has been such a transactional space that we're missing out on the engagement that it could bring. So as far as what could we be doing that we aren't doing, I'd love to have the ability to engage fans in international markets the way we do it in the US.
I think the editorial was so key around that to make it feel seamless and part of the broadcast, rather than a sort of, how do we shoehorn this in? And we've been fortunate enough to do that with our partners in terms of Thursday Night Football with Amazon Prime, and having those custom segments, each of the talent as well picking their own bets that would come together as a parlay bet, and then that's one that we can push on our site as well, and also ahead of the broadcast, trying to get those eyeballs excited about the game in the days leading up to it. In the same way we can do that, okay, what can we do using our site merchandise and the space there to help promote that, to help bring that, and then we know more eyeballs are going to come because they've got skin in the game, essentially. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that with our partnerships here.
I'm sorry, Hampus, if you're going to jump in. But I'm actually very curious, because Corey is staying very quiet here. He is the European operator on the panel. This point about broadcast integration in the US and engagement, is that a thing that you would actually like, or are we just talking to ourselves on this?
It is important, and link it to things I've said already. For younger people, and in our business, more than 70% of all new customers are under the age of 30, and so it's a quite young group of people. Because on our platforms we can see what people watch, how long they watch it, how many devices they have, I can see what the future should be. And that's what I'm focused on around how people consume sport. It's up to other people to create some of the technology to support on data analytics, putting virtual glasses on and being on the pitch and seeing statistics overlaid on the screens. We're doing overlay stuff that we've developed ourselves that allows people to press the screen and do stuff on our platform. There's going to be more technology like that. I think you see all these guys running around on the pitch with these little things under their jerseys that develops a lot more data points per person on the pitch, and you're seeing more of that integrated into platforms that people have in their sports books, but also in the broadcast. There's a lot more broadcast now. I have a bunch of sports bars. I have 90 sports bars. In our broadcast now, through some of our partners, you can see the visualization that's with the games themselves, and people have more to engage with in that moment around the data and the visualization of the data. So the visualization of data is the most important thing, because strolling a bunch of numbers, it doesn't work.
I think in the AFL, I think they've tried it before a big kick. You can see the player's heart rate comes on. Obviously, that's unlikely to be commonplace. But if you see that heart rate jump incredibly, in a end of the season big game compared to what it does earlier, and you can align markets to that. Obviously, it's a bit of far away, but those sorts of things you could do and really sort of bring things to life if we could sort of look in blue sky and regulation out the tape.
That's to me the key. There are very few politicians that try to regulate sport. And so there's a much wider range of opportunities to develop technologies that go with it. And if rights holders, clubs themselves, leagues and associations participate in this, then having fans engage more directly with what's going on in the game, with the athletes themselves, with the coaches, with the strategy, with the statistics that go with the game, I think that creates more compelling in-game live experience. There's enough companies creating post-game content. There's plenty of content being developed pre and post game. I have 11 sports shows in different countries. There's a lot of that, but the data has to go with the technology, and younger people want technology that doesn't exist. They want to see all things in their hands multiple times, and that doesn't exist. Right now they can't pull a single device and watch 4 different things plus have all these overlays at the same time. I suspect they will in the future, but that's the kind of technology we would like to see.
And I guess from our perspective, Ralph spoke about this on the panel before. We all heard about cookies disappearing and then, the need to do more with the first-party data that everyone has. Everyone's trying to get more fan data, right? Operators, rights holders, everyone in the industry. But I think there's also an opportunity in real long-term partnerships to, sit down and you look at, how can we collectively connect and use that data together. And I think that's not really something which is happening a lot yet. There are reasons for that, GDPR, et cetera. But with time, if you have the long-term partnerships and now the technology that's able to do it, then you can kind of build richer fan profiles and work together in terms of, how are we going to curate messaging that, is targeting them, as opposed to just all going after the same fans on different platforms for different DSPs, bidding each other up, all that stuff, which, is effectively happening, and there's a reason for that. But I think, if we're able to kind of, I guess, break down the walls of, trust and build data clean rooms and, that are possible to do, then sports can follow the examples of other industries like retail where this is already happening. So for me, that's something which, to your question, what isn't happening yet, it's a big area, I think, for both rights holders and their partners to look into.
And then in terms of the regulation then, I know a couple of you touched on it then, as we know in the UK at the moment, we've just had the gambling white paper from the UK government on the back of the Gambling Act review. And we do know that sports betting is obviously one of the closest sponsorship product category to sport itself. But, do certain negative connotations, the way some politicians view betting, for example, are those perceptions going to get in the way of opportunities and growth within the industry? Corey, do you want to come in on that one?
Look, I will say this. I think more broadly what brings negative connotation to the industry are operations that are unlicensed and operate with unregulated currencies and are front and center with sports clubs and rights holders that maybe need more education about what's permitted and what isn't. And in some cases, rights hold, and everybody knows this in the room, some rights holders, it's an economic decision. They should do more diligence around what should be a partnership, which is what all of us are saying up here. And I think when that doesn't happen, there's several exposés in this country about a couple football clubs that did not engage in proper due diligence of partners that don't even have websites or sports books or legal businesses. These things create some negativity in the industry. I think it's important for those of us who operate with a license, properly do things above board, as they used to say, are more vocal. I think there's a lot of vocal conversation. Inside the industry, I think people are less apt to confront their peers in the industry around these topics, but I do think these are the types of things that bring a negative light to the industry. So you have to counteract that with programs. And in the UK in particular, there's a lot on the player protection side and responsible gaming. There's a mixed bag of that in Europe. I hope that the regulators in European markets find more consistency in their regulations, particularly around marketing, which is a big topic for today. It's countries like Italy, it doesn't really make any kind of sense whatsoever. If you're William Hill, someone was here from William Hill earlier, in Italy you can't be williamhill.it, but you can be williamhill.news. That just doesn't make much sense around the purpose of the regulation or what operators should be doing to operate properly. So I hope that over time the industry can help move regulation to a more rational and consistent space and kind of drown out some of the negativity, or it's going to change. Some regulation around crypto or something like that will force change in the industry. But I think these are the things that get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the similar regulation for a number of years in this country. I mean, Ryan, obviously, you're dealing very much with the US. Is there anything that you're seeing from what has happened in Europe that obviously you're taking learnings from to the US in terms of, you know, what can be done to mitigate against these perceptions actually building in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's the key of learning all the lessons from 10, 15 years ago up until now, and making sure that not only us but everyone that we interact with in this space we're doing everything in a responsible way and sort of complying with the guidelines, being the bare minimum and wanting to be the leaders in that space. And there's a lot of collaboration as well, whether that's with across different operators, across teams, leagues, even other different third parties within that ecosystem, aligning on messages, what can and can't be said, how we market, and all of those elements. And whether that collaboration was happening in other markets sort of at an early stage in that, perhaps not so much. So maybe that collaboration and sort of, I guess, review might be one as a real lesson learned, and we can take it forward in that way.
And obviously from the European operator's point of view, there's a lot in terms of education that can be done, because a lot of this is it is perception, isn't it, from political parties, etc. But is there anything that you're doing around trying to work with regulators, work with various political parties to try and assuage some of those perceptions?
Yeah, we do both. So in the countries where we operate, 10, we're from the north in Estonia to Spain to Malta to Croatia, we're all over Europe. And we see a lot of different regulation and political will around certain types of things. What we're trying to do, there's 3 or 4 countries and add 2 more regulators that we regularly engage with around how the industry works. Everybody out here that's familiar with Europe knows this, but every country has their own rules for lots of different things, even what a product is. Some countries in Europe don't understand what poker is. They don't understand what fantasy sports is about. And so fantasy sports in most continental European countries isn't legal because they don't understand it and it hasn't been regulated. So in many markets, we're trying to educate not only on what's effective marketing or what in reality is an effective player protection, harm minimization policy that doesn't create more offshore illegal stuff, how to create better enforcement, let's say, of AML, particularly around unregulated currencies, but just how does the industry actually work? Politicians don't really know that well. What's the difference between an arcade machine and a Class A slot or a Vegas-style machine, as some people call it? Why is poker a different game than blackjack? Why is fantasy sports none of the above? And so we spend a lot of time trying to do these things. And I think, again, the industry and others in it can play a big part in that because they need the education.
Are they receptive to those conversations?
Yes. So I would say only once have we had a kind of negative response, and it was around fantasy sports. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, it's been pretty open.
That's good.
So maybe there's a lesson there for everybody in the room that to actually go out and have some engagement with various regulators is probably the way to go. And just bringing Kuljit back in from the rights holders' point of view here, around some of this due diligence that goes towards a lot of these particular deals that we've referenced here. I mean, I think externally NBA is perceived to be quite thorough in a lot of the due diligence that takes place ahead of you entering into any partnerships. What sort of advice would you offer to other rights holders and to the betting operators in terms of trying to make those partnerships work?
The perception of us being thorough is a good one, so I'm pleased about that. But I'm not sure it's our role to be giving anybody advice. It's really just how we view the space. It's complicated, and we are not an operator. We are not like directly involved in the gaming space. There are markets where betting is clearly legal, where it's clearly prohibited, and then all different shades of grey in between, right? If I look at Brazil as an example, betting was legalized in 2018. We're still waiting for regulation. We're still waiting for a licensed operator. Everybody is operating there, and the local teams, leagues are accepting sponsorships in the category. But for us, we just need bright lines. because sifting through that is the sort of thing that Corey and Ryan and Sportradar team are going through every day. We don't have the bandwidth to do that, and that's not what we're getting involved in. So for us, it's very simple. If betting is legal in a particular country and the authorities in that country deem an operator worthy of a license, that gives us confidence that operator is, can do business in that country. So we just look for those kind of bright lines. But on the other point, I know there was some comments about player protection here, and clearly that's mostly focused on the operator side. But we have taken steps there to try and help. For us, it's about putting betting in front of fans who want to see betting. So we find ways for them to opt in. On NBA digital platforms, for example, you can see betting odds, but you have to opt in to see them. We have a betting content platform, NBA Bet. Like if a fan goes to NBA Bet, we can be fairly confident that that's what they want to see. So we try and segment who wants to see betting and who doesn't. So that's one of the steps that we take to try and be responsible in that respect.
Good stuff. Okay, I think before we move to questions from the audience, what I'd really like to do is to understand a bit about if you were in each other's shoes. I think we'll do one of those questions. So obviously, from the operator perspective, if you were on the rights holder side, is there anything that you would do differently, anything you'd adjust or modify? And the same for Kuljit on the other side if you were the betting operator. So, Ryan, do you want to
Yeah, I'll
take that one
pretend
first?
that Kuljit isn't from the NBA and is from a very minor sport, be it tiddlywinks or hopscotch or futsal or any other type of game. I think we could do, the traditional type of partnerships can be done with those emerging sports, those more minor sports, but having it at both ends, like I was talking about earlier, in terms of having a engaging, bettable product there, is something that is not necessarily easy or overly straightforward. Whether that's the availability of live data, whether that's streaming, whether that's the odds, whether that's different betting products within that, and visualizations, widgets, content, sort of pre and live, all of those different elements. And without wanting to sort of say, everyone go to Sportradar, having it within the same ecosystem is helpful. It's helpful to get it online and to get it up and running, or at least, the other providers that people are already working with, while it's the less sexy side of things. To get those things on a roadmap is never easy, competing against the larger, higher revenue generating products. So making that as seamless as possible alongside the proposition and the messaging that you can deliver and what you can get out of that sponsorship, I think is a real step to getting those partnerships underway with those sports that perhaps will benefit more from the partnership with those tier one operators and that side of things.
Yeah, Kuljit, have you got anything from the rights holder perspective?
I mean, I'd buy different shoes. That's for sure. I mean, this isn't about Corey and Ryan and their two businesses and those two as partners, because frankly they do a lot. They do a ton. But I would guess one of the things, and we understand that operators have different challenges, just going live, getting market access, having to worry about payment mechanisms and whatever else. But I guess one of the things that we have found over time is that operators are very quick to go live with direct marketing. It's very easy to get banners up. But all the other elements that really make a partnership holistic and deliver a good experience, they can sometimes fall behind, right? So I guess it's just about devoting more resources up front, because we want to make an impact when we have a partnership. Definitely not a criticism of these guys. Actually, Corey just spent a week with Gary Payton in Estonia and Lithuania, so he certainly isn't messing around when it comes to activating our partnership.
Thanks for the plug.
And Hampus obviously is a facilitator of these, these agreements and introductions, etc. Is there anything from your perspective that you think would be useful for each side to think about?
I think it's a bit along the lines that Kuljit was just talking about, right? And thinking about this probably earlier on in the process when it comes to, a lot of the time thinking in regards to an activation strategy happens, you've signed a contract, you have your rights package, like how are we going to activate this? That conversation should probably be happening a lot earlier, right? Like, why are we even considering sponsoring this property? Like, what problem are we trying to solve as an operator? And is this sponsorship property the right fit to do that, right? which part of the funnel are we trying to address? Is this just an awareness topic? Are we trying to, get conversions? Are we trying to build loyalty? Maybe all of the above, right? But then you got to make sure that, the negotiation, the rights package, it addresses all of those points, and that you go into the partnership having already kind of laid out the parameters for that, and getting the rights holder thinking along the same lines, because stuff takes time, Developing products, new rights, activation plans, it all takes a lot of time. So I think moving that process earlier, approaching each sponsorship like a partnership, that's also, from the rights holder side, really getting into the shoes, Corey's shoes, of the operator, and thinking, like, how am I going to help him, grow his business? I think that would be, my advice. And then you could start using all this cool technology that, we've heard about today in terms of doing that. But I guess, that kind of mindset and ultimately process.
So more open discussion and much earlier in the process, basically.
Sure.
Okay, great. I think on that note, we'll throw this open to questions from the floor. So if anybody's got anything, please let us know.
I'm going to throw a question in, which is a barrier to the bar, but let's make it a quick one. Firstly, great panel, really good insights and experience, so thank you very much for that. I'm really interested about, we talk about technology as a feature, but let's talk about the platforms that came out of that and the ecosystem around social media. And with talent having followings and their own audiences, what, if any, effect has that had on how rights have been viewed and the individual followings of talent around that, and does that influence decision-making more? So interested in the panel's perspective on that.
Who wants to take that one? Don't all shout at once.
No.
I think with certain talent, we've had some great partnerships there. We've got Kevin Hart's probably a front and centre example of ours. And I guess it's just like anything, it's finding that vehicle, let's call Kevin a vehicle for this purpose, to connect with the right audience in that way, and different audiences. It doesn't necessarily need to be a sports person in that way, and also it's finding how they show up as well, sort of what they bring when they're perhaps connecting with a smaller group of people, but actually that energy, that experience, I guess, that can deliver beyond just those sort of assets in the digital version. What they can deliver beyond that has actually been really, really impactful, and something that not necessarily anybody can bring to the table. So we've had a lot of different talent partners across different levels, some short term, some longer term. But when they can really, I guess, immerse in that partnership and get those messages at the right time, particular athletes or celebrities have different, fan bases around different sports as well, and that's been huge. UFC for us, for example, and that side of things. So, yes, I guess is the short answer. But yes, we've seen it to both that acquisition side and that experience and engagement side.
I would say the same as I said about the content shows. So you need to work with partners, so athletes that want to be supportive of it and who aren't just looking for extra income, but are really engaged in what you're trying to do and in managing their own social interactions with it. And there has to be a story to tell. Some athletes are more engaging than others, and that's just a fact. Everybody knows that. So if you're trying to maximize something other than just doing advertising, you need to have athletes that are really interested in their own brand, being engaged in activities, doing activations, and they have to have a good story to tell, and they have to be a storyteller.
Thanks, everybody. Are there any further questions?
Just wanted to pick up on a point from Kuljit there about sponsors, I guess, panicking and the short-termism with which they enter partnerships. I wonder whether, from a rights holder perspective, is it not born out of that short-termism? And would rights holders look at longer-term partnerships in order for sponsors to be able to have time to implement, to innovate, and to actually drive partnerships forward, particularly given that it's a pretty well-known fact that in terms of brand correlation, it's the longer-term, year after year association that can prove more successful at the top of the funnel. So yeah, I just wanted to make the point that maybe there's a responsibility on both sides there. However, market conditions often mean that the rights holders will just get the next cab off the rank every year, every season, in order to drive more commercial revenue.
Yeah, look, I like the way you think, and it's a very fair question. And we don't engage in those short-term partnerships for that exact reason. You know, I often say, and anybody who's spoken to me, is that, you know, our goal is that our partner becomes the home of NBA betting in their market, right? That's the experience we're trying to achieve. You can't do that in a year. So all of our partnerships are longer term than that. You know, like what long term means, you know, clearly everybody has an expiry date in mind. But we've renewed all our partnerships. So, you know, I can feel confident now. Certainly 5 years ago, sitting here having this conversation, talking about holistic partnerships and growing market share and whatever else, it was a very different way of doing things. And I'm not going to say it was easy then, but I am going to say it's a lot easier now because we have a lot of results that prove that if we do engage fans in that way, we do not just bring in NBA fans from other operators to our partners, but also new fans, because we're just talking about betting in a fun way rather than a transactional way. That's the best way I can put it. But you're absolutely right. Like that short-termism is definitely what we try to avoid. But potentially, having not been on the inside of a Premier League club, they have different ways of going about their partnerships for sure. But you know, I think there is also a bit of prove the model type of thinking. You know, no partner wants to jump into bed for 10 years. You know, our partnership with Sportradar has been extended for another 10, but they had a fairly good honeymoon period there of 5 or so years. So we get it. You know, like we don't engage in any partnership thinking when this term ends, that's the end of it. Like, that's not the way we view any partnership, but we do understand that clearly there needs to be some success in order to motivate the extension of that partnership.
And I think to that point, like, there are Premier League probably examples which are more sponsorship versus partnership, right? The operator wants to do it for a year because he wants to kind of test and see how many eyeballs am I getting on this. That's pretty much the core KPI that they're looking for, versus perhaps a more strategic long-term NBA partnership that also allows you to get into some of these conversations about content and, you know, breaking down some of those walls, you know, which are, you know, hard conversations to have. You know, we mentioned first-party data today. Those conversations, to your point, aren't really possible to have in a one-year deal. So hopefully there will be more of the longer-term partnerships moving away from one or even 1+1 year deals where, you know, you're not really bothering to have those conversations.
I just want to give one example of this, actually, because a staple of our partnership is a free-to-play game. You know, that top of funnel experience, the thing that every NBA fan can engage with, whether they want to bet or not. It's just fun to make predictions. And I remember when we were speaking with our French partner about this, and they said they weren't sure that a predictive game was the way to do this. You know, they predict the results a bit like Sky Super 6 in the UK, predict the results of X number of NBA games. And they wanted to have a game where you predicted the monthly winners of Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, of the month, and Player of the Month. And they're really 3 prizes we don't think about a lot. And I was like, no, that's a terrible, terrible idea. Anyway, we ran this game for a year, the predictive one, which is directly tied to betting markets, so most operators like that conversion. And in France, you cannot bet on the Player of the Month, Rookie of the Month, Coach of the Month. So there is no direct conversion. Anyway, the game didn't perform very well that first year, so we switched. And I was still like, this is absolutely terrible. And I think we had something like 12x the number of players in the first 3 months of that version of the game. And that was just a bit of eye-opening for us, that this is why we need longer-term partnerships, partly because of my stupidity and like not being open to this, to other concepts, but it's to iterate and improve year on year. Like that's the goal.
Great, thanks everyone. Is there one more question?
To that point with the Premier League, as one of the most prominent rights holders in the UK and potentially Europe, they've recently announced the removal of sponsor names from their shirts. I think 9 out of the 20 teams, in fact, had betting sponsors on their shirts. Do you think that's an example of how that shift into the digital space more, and what impact do you think that will have on the wider sponsorships market? Do you think that will expedite that move into the digital space, and just what wider impact do you think that will have on the market?
You're right, Tom. Like that's happened, but I think the headlines are all saying, "Oh, no more sports betting sponsorship in the UK." That's obviously still not the case. It's just that the brands are moving from here to here. So what will happen is the value of these deals are probably going to go up, probably a bit of overinflation on the value of sleeve deals. In my opinion, the brands are still going to be on the boards, right? So whether, that much money disappears into other avenues, let's see. But I think there's still going to be significant sports betting sponsorship in the UK, at least in the short run. I think the issue that's trying to address is what I think we talked about on a few of these panels, and that's where I think like the more targeted digital marketing will probably do a lot better of a job at addressing, what the real issue is, which is, protecting vulnerable people from gambling, right? So that's why, all the things that we talked about on the paid social panel, like that's really the key, in my point of view, to address what the real problem is. That would be my 2 cents on that.
I guess sort of 25, 30 years ago, a fair few, what was then the Premiership teams, McEwen's Lager, Carlsberg and so on, and alcohol still got its relationship with sport. I'd say, I can't imagine it's been a while since many people in here have drunk a can of McEwen's Lager, but it feels like Carlsberg had maintained that relationship. It was Liverpool. I'm sure a Liverpool fan would know better, but that's one that's maintained without that shirt sponsorship. So whether it's different assets, different ways of activating, it might encourage people to be more creative, but it looks like it can still stay. We were chatting earlier that, in the mid-90s, Formula 1 cars were classed as cigarettes, but that's probably one that's moved a bit further apart for one reason or another. But, I think there's a chance to be creative there as well.
Great. Thanks very much to all the panellists. Really appreciate you coming along today to take part. So thank you for a really good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.